formats. And then you've got to put those all together in one piece of software. And then you want the piece of software to run smoothly and work these files, and they grade. So as you can understand, with the post-production process, it's always a challenge to kind of keep up with what camera manufacturers are doing. And the other thing as well is that with these cameras, not only do they shoot different file formats, they shoot different resolutions. So, you guys might be working with a different mixture of HD and 4K and 8K. And if you've got one of our Ursa 12Ks, you can shoot 12K as well. So you've got this sort of range of different formats and a range of different frame rates. And again, you've got to drop them all into one piece of software and it works smoothly. And then the final sort of element of that is you get your files from your camera, you work with them, the delivery aspect as well. There's loads and loads of different delivery formats. If you're doing higher end stuff, you might need IMF or Disney IMF. You might be going out to YouTube, you might be going out to Vimeo, you might be doing something where, you're going to do an online delivery, but the client wants sort of a high-res file to look at, so you might have to render out like a DNxHR file and send that to them. So, there's a whole mixture of multiple delivery demands again. So if you think sort of the challenge in post is quite difficult, doing all of these things together and getting your little laptop to play back smoothly. As I said, this is where sort of Resolve's strengths come in, because saying is it can read all these different file formats. This is just a handful, and if you look on there, I've put QuickTime, because again, as you probably know, QuickTime can read hundreds of different formats. But it just gives you an idea of what Resolve is able to work with. And up until a few years ago, there was sort of a breakdown of sort of, what files you should use, or, if you were going to hire a camera, for example, what camera should you hire? What was the best file to work with? And you found it sort of split into three different areas. You kind of had the lower end files. So things like H.264 and H.265 files. H.264 and 265, they are a delivery format. They're designed for delivery. Things you watch on YouTube are H.264 or 265 files. But obviously, because they are really, really small files, when you shoot material on your phone, you're shooting that compressed format. A lot of cameras and a lot of DSLR cameras take advantage of that, because if you've only got a little SD card in the camera, having small files is really beneficial. So again, a lot of people use these, which is great, but then there were issues sort of working with them in post. They're a small file size, but up until very recently, they used the CPU to decode the files, which isn't as quick as GPU. They're often shot in a very, very limited color space. So, H.265 can be 10-bit, but a lot of the time it's 8-bit. So when you start to push color around in it, the image will start to break up. And it's often filmed in a limited color gamut. So quite often, for example, it'll maybe shoot Rec 709. So you're shooting within a very limited color space. And again, when it comes to grading your footage, you are quite limited as to what you can do. Now, at the other end of you high-end raw files like RED. So RED files, R3D files, are fantastic, but they're big. They're really big files. And they're very intensive to use. Well, I say very intensive. They're quite intensive to use on sort of lower spec machines, because they use the GPU to debias, but also they lean on the CPU when needed. But they're really big files. And again, when you play them back on your system, what you probably find is it kind of drops frames a lot of the time, because there's a lot of processing with those files. And again, the advantage is you have things like a 12-bit color space. So, you've got a huge amount of color information, but the color space is dictated by the camera, which is ideal because they know what their camera shoots and how much color information they need to capture. But the downside is to these files, they're really, really big, and they require quite a powerful machine to use them. And this is why a lot of people still use ProRes. Our cameras, like our pocket cameras, still shoot ProRes because they're a larger file, but not big. Let's say not big, they're not huge. They use the GPU to decode. They're 10-bit files, and the color space is dictated by the camera again. But what we wanted to do as a company, we were sort of going, well, you've got these high-end files, you've got these raw files that have all the information that colorists want and visual effects artists want, so you can get the grade looking exactly as you want it to. But they're really difficult to handle. So what we did is we developed a new format. So Blackmagic Raw, our cameras shoot Blackmagic Raw. And this ties into working with Resolve, and you'll see why in a second. But the idea behind Blackmagic Raw was we wanted to build a file format that was raw, so had all the raw color information in it. So, all that raw profile, all that dynamic range, bit depth. But we wanted to do it in a relatively small file size. So the camera does some of the processing. So the file you get out the back end is relatively small, and it's a single file, so it's not like an image sequence. So again, you can use it like a QuickTime file. You can open it up and view it. You can, just drag it into a Dropbox folder and send it to somebody. It's very easy to handle. And also with that, what we wanted to do is also with the raw file, we wanted an accurate color reproduction. So even though it was a raw file and we wanted the file size to be small, we didn't want to lose any color information. And there isn't anything lost. The camera shoots 16-bit linear that is then sort of encoded on the camera as 12-bit log. So again, you have a huge amount of color information. But one of the main things is the workflow efficiency. What we wanted to do is we wanted to build a raw file that you could use like a QuickTime file, like a ProRes file. So you could drop it into a timeline, you could work with it, you could edit with it without having to create proxy media. And again, for us, because, if you think like a pocket 4K camera now is sort of like around $1,000. And, we couldn't say to people well, our camera's $1,000, but to use the files, you need a $20,000 PowerPC to do it. So again, we looked a lot at the workflow efficiency. And for us, this is really important because we're the only company that deals with everything from acquisition to delivery. So everything from the light hitting the lens in a camera to what you deliver to your client, we're the only company that kind of handles the whole process. So as I was saying, Red, Arri, Sony, Canon, we just picked a handful of those guys. They all make brilliant cameras. Don't get me wrong. The cameras are fantastic. But with those guys, they record their files that best suits their camera. So for example, Red did think about production because in the card that sort of accelerated your machine to work with Red files. And DaVinci Resolve can read files from a Red, an Arri, a Sony, a Canon. But again, how they work might not be ideal for post-production. They're ideal for grading and everything else, but what I mean by is they may not be ideal for the performance of the machine that you're working on. And if you think these guys manufacture cameras, so ultimately they record something that suits their camera, and then when the file comes out the camera, they sort of go, right, that's our bit done. So again, if you've ever watched sort of demos between Arri and Sony and Canon, doing demos, one of the first things they often do is pull the files out of their camera and they drop them into Resolve to actually show what they look like and show the quality and change the color space. So again, the post-production element is sort of our responsibility. And it's the same the other way around is, you've got, if you look at the editing systems you've got Final Cut Pro, you've got Premiere, you've got Media Composer that are the top three. I know Sony does Vegas as well, so I use slightly less. But sort of those three applications are the main ones. But again, those guys deal in post. They deal in post-production. They don't really deal with cameras. I know Apple has ProRes Raw, but again, ProRes Raw is just the format, but the information it's sent is from somebody else's camera. It's an off-board recorder that sends the information from the camera into the off-board recorder, and it records ProRes Raw. So again, the post industry doesn't have to deal with cameras, and this is where our strength comes in because we can sort of control the whole pipeline. So again, what we wanted to do is we wanted to build a raw format that worked really well in post-production with Resolve. And again, the question then always becomes well, surely then if you're shooting a raw file that is smaller, you're losing something surely in the acquisition process, and you're not. because with Blackmagic Raw, it's totally versatile. You can shoot lots of different resolutions in it. So for example, our Ursa 12K camera, you can shoot 12K, 8K, 4K, all on the same camera. You know, it's just a matter of going into the menu and flicking between your change the resolution you want to shoot at. So for example, a lot of people doing natural history, it's a really versatile camera, because if you're filming an animal on the plane, you might want to shoot 12K because you're sort of filming an animal that may run somewhere, but you don't know which way it's going to run. So you can shoot 12K and then obviously punch into the area where the animal is, because you're not going to deliver in 12K. And then the flip side as well is, you know, is if you, again, you're filming the same animal, but it's on a track and it can't sort of really run anywhere, you can drop the camera down to 4K and then flick the camera into 240 frames a second and get super slow motion. So with Blackmagic Raw, yeah, you're not losing anything in the acquisition process. We've also got Gen 5 color science, and Gen 5 color science is great because it works. What we've done with Gen 5 color science is we want it to work really, really well with skin tones, because for so many people, skin tone is so important. So what we've done with Gen 5 color science is it maintains accurate skin tones from set. So again, it's that whole idea of what you're shooting on set, you know, what you've exposed for is translated into post. So with acquisition, you're not really losing anything either. So then the question always comes back to is, well, sure, if I'm using raw files, what computer should I buy? Because surely whenever you say using sort of raw on a computer, people always think you need something really powerful. And the truth is, if you want Resolve to run an 8K timeline with lots and lots of raw files, and not sort of Blackmagic Raw, so, you know, if you're using things like Red Raw, for example, if you want Resolve to run real time with those files all the time, and you know you want to be able to throw grades on and visual effects and everything play back real time, then yes, you need a machine that may cost you $20,000. However, you don't always need that. So what we're saying is, yes, if you've got a budget of $20,000 to spend on a system for your post-production house or your own studio, then yeah, spend the money because you'll get an amazing machine. However, if you're working on a budget of kind of like these machines are, kind of $1,800 to $2,000 for a system, you can still run Resolve very, very well. You just need to sort of bear some things in mind. And again, when we go through the Resolve demo, I'll show you what these things are. So just to reiterate, as you're probably aware, Resolve is available across the three main operating systems. I said it's Windows 10 at the moment. I know Windows 11 is out. Resolve will run on Windows 11. It's just our development team. Obviously, Windows 11 hasn't been out that long, and our dev team are working on getting Resolve updated to Windows 11 because it's still quite new, but I'm pretty sure that will come in time. So, but again, you've got Mac, you've got Windows, you've got Linux if you want it. The licensing that you get, the license keys for Resolve, they work across any platform, so you can, you know, it's not sort of, the license isn't specific per operating system. And also you've got two licenses to run at the same time. So that license key that you get, you can, you know, put it on, if you've got a Mac laptop and a PC desktop, you can put that license key on both machines at the same time and it'll work absolutely perfectly. So this whole idea between cost and performance sort of got us around to this new Apple M1 silicon chip. So when the M1's machines were launched last year, there was a lot of noise around them obviously on the internet. The industry took notice of this because it's a very, very new thing, and it's a very, very clever thing. Because, you know, traditionally computers have set resources. You know, you've got a GPU and a CPU and your RAM, and they talk to each other and they work, you know, they work in their own little silos, but they talk to each other. The idea of obviously the M1 chip is you've got everything on a chip. So you've got things like unified memory, so it can share the memory where it needs to. Everything's talking to each other. And ultimately, for a piece of software like Resolve, it really does sort of bump the performance level up. So this is why we started to do some tests around this. That's not to say, and again, I'll talk about this a little bit, that's not to say we're not, you know, we're putting all our focus on Mac. We are still developing a lot around PC. We're still working very closely with the likes of Nvidia and around their new GPUs as well. But what we wanted to do is sort of take a look at the Apple M1 systems and see how well they worked with Resolve. Because this is what appeared on our website. This is what appeared on our website when the Apple M1 system was launched, and we announced the release of Resolve 17.1. So Resolve 17.1 was the first software that was designed to work with Apple Silicon. So this was sort of all over our website going, oh, it's, you know, it's 3 times faster, you know, it's up to 3 times faster on Mac with M1 chips. You can play back and edit and grade 4K files. You've got accelerated H.265 encoding. But the thing when I saw this on our website, I was kind of going, what do you mean by 3 times faster? What does that mean? You know, what are you doing that's 3 times faster? So we decided to acquire some machines and run some tests. So we required a sort of a range of different machines for the M1 systems. Now, just to clarify, these are the M1. So these are not the M1 Pro or the M1 Max. They're just the off-the-shelf basic M1 chips. So we tested a Mac Mini that had a standard 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, 16-core neural engine, and 8 gig of unified memory. I know this machine very well because this is my home media server. I took it to work and my wife wondered where all her music library had gone. So I know this machine very well because it's my own personal machine at home. So yeah, we sort of, I commandeered that. And then also we got a 24-inch M1 iMac. Exactly the same chip, exactly the same M1 chip. Same CPU, same GPU, same neural engine, same memory. Exactly the same. I expected a slight difference between the machines because, you know, the iMac is an all-in-one system, whereas the Mac Mini, you are actually running an external monitor. And also because of simply the footprint of the two, the iMac's cooling system I expected to be a little bit better. So it might just be cranked up a little bit higher. We then also got a 13-inch MacBook Pro, which was the same chip, but it had 16 gig of unified memory, not just 8. This is the machine that's sitting in front of me here. So this is the machine that ran these tests. This is the 13-inch MacBook Pro M1. So this is the machine I'm going to be demoing on today. And then we also needed a bench test. I needed something, you know, if we were comparing these sort of entry-level Macs, I needed something to compare it to. So we got a 2019 15-inch MacBook Pro with an Intel i7 processor, 4 gigabyte GPU, and 16 gig of RAM. So very much not an entry-level Intel machine. This was quite an expensive Intel MacBook Pro because it's, you know, it's the i7 processor. It had a bigger GPU. It's got more RAM than the standard 8 gig that you got. So it wasn't just an entry-level machine. The next thing we want to do is look at the tests. Now, there's lots of videos online about this and a lot of people writing about the tests that and comparisons that they do between machines. The thing that I always look into when I read any of these things is they don't tell you exactly what they're doing. And what I mean by that is quite often people go, well, this machine's quicker than this one and this one's quicker than this one. But people don't often go, this is the exact resolution of file that I'm using. This is the timeline resolution that I'm using. And they're the two things that can critically affect some performance tests. So what I did with the performance tests, I needed 3 that would really push the machines. The first one was the scene cut detection. And admittedly, I say push the machines. I just really wanted to see what they would do. The scene cut detection was the benchmark. It wasn't that intensive a process. So what I did is I got a 2-minute ProRes 8K file, dropped that into the timeline, and then if you've ever seen the scene cut detect in Resolve, is it will auto cut a sort of ready edited clip in the timeline, and it'll just detect the differences between the frames and automatically splice your clip. So, you know, if you've rendered out a QuickTime file, you can then drop it back into Resolve and it'll auto cut it. And so this process was, it's not that intensive, but as I said, I did it on an 8K file. The timeline in Resolve was set to 1080p, and the clip did include some transitions in it, so it gave it a bit of a challenge to work out where some of the cuts were. The second test we did was around the speed warp. So the speed warp's an interesting thing, and I'll show you speed warp in the Resolve demo. The speed warp is an interesting thing because it uses a neural engine process. So it uses AI in Resolve to work out missing frames, but then also playing back speed warp real time is very, very difficult unless you have a really, really high powered machine. So ultimately, you know, what you have to do is you have to cache the file. So the caching of the file is a GPU process. So it just goes and basically writes the file so you can play it back real time. So it was a 10-second clip playing at 50% speed. It was set to ProRes 422, and again, the timeline was set to 1080p. And then the final thing I did was a magic mask. It was a 20-second clip, single person track, and again, same 1080p timeline setup. The magic mask is a pure neural engine process. Again, it's where you've probably seen this. You can just select a person or a feature, and Resolve will auto mask it and track. So these are the clips we looked at. The speed warp and the magic mask were both done on 8K Blackmagic Raw files. So again, same clips used across each system. And these are the results we got. So to begin with, the scene cut detection, as I said, it was sort of the benchmark test. And as you can see, all the machines perform pretty much the same. The Intel machine was actually slightly quicker than the Mac Mini and the iMac. It was slightly quicker. But then when you got into the speed warp caching, the Intel machine started to slow down a little bit. The other M1 systems, just with, you know, that caching of an AI process, the Intel machine started to get a little bit slower. And then when you got to a magic mask, which was a pure neural engine, a pure AI process, obviously the Intel machine was a lot slower because it has no neural engine processor. So all of a sudden you can see that magic mask, to track that magic mask on the other machines, it took like 30 seconds. On the Intel machine, it took over 2 minutes to do the tracking on that clip. So all of a sudden, yeah, it wasn't maybe 3 times as faster, but it's not far away from being 3 times quicker. The other thing I really wanted to try was the render test output, because I know I have my own work machine is an Intel MacBook Pro. I don't have an M1, I've got an Intel. And I know that rendering things out on that system, it's quicker than if I take files home and render them out on my Mac Mini. Because the rendering on these was quite, slow, for want of a better word. If I had an H.265 file to render, it was quite slow. So what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to do a render test output for H.265 files, because they're quite intensive. So what I had is I had a timeline that was a mixture of 8K and 12K Blackmagic Raw files shot at 25 frames a second. It was a 10-minute timeline set to Ultra HD. It was rendered out as H.265, and it had several things applied to it, you know, common tasks that a colorist would probably do to their timeline. So to begin with, the first thing we did is the clip was color managed. So using Resolve color management, everything was put into a Rec. 709 output profile. And then there were 5 modes of grading. So the first one was a simple color balance where we adjusted the contrast, adjusted the color slightly. You probably won't be able to see this on the Zoom slide. There was then a noise reduction. We just did a little bit noisy, so we did a noise reduction on them. There was then a power window applied to all the clips, so you know you could just sort of as you say, sort of pull down the foreground slightly. There's then a color warper. We wanted these shots, the client wanted these shots to have this kind of warm magenta look for the outdoor shots. So we used a quick color warper to do that. It wasn't quite a massively detailed grade. And then each clip had quite an intensive lens reflection effect applied to it. So all of these clips, they admittedly, you know, they had the same thing done to them, but it was just to show there was a noise reduction on there, there was a color balance, there was sort of a window, there was a secondary, not really a secondary correction, but another correction of some sort, and then a filter at the end. And that was applied to every single clip, and then the machines were set to render out at H.265. And these were the results. The poor old MacBook Pro Intel machine, I set it off going one night, and I came back the following morning, and the poor thing was still going. So it got up to about 18 hours, and then I just stopped it. It had been going so long, and the processor fans had been kicking in for ages. So I was kind of going, you know what, I'll stop it there, because it proves the point. The Mac Mini did the same render in 4 hours, the iMac in 3 hours, the MacBook Pro M1 with more memory took less than 2 hours to do it. So all of a sudden, that 3 times faster performance, when it comes to render times, is very accurate. You know, it is more, when you're doing H.265 rendering, it is more than 3 times faster. So this was, you know, this was an amazing result. And so then what I also wanted to check was the fact that, you know, when we update Resolve, we are always making improvements to the M1 performance. So when we do updates to Resolve, our development team are great, and they're kind of constantly working to get Resolve working more efficiently with these new M1 chips. So this is what we did. So I remember when I did these tests at the time, Resolve 17.3 was the latest version of Resolve. I know we're on 17.4.4 that was released yesterday. So at the time, this was Resolve 17.3. So what I did was I rolled the M1 machines back to 17.1, because the performance figures you saw in the previous slide was all 17.3 for all machines. But what I did is I rolled the M1 systems back to 17.1 just to show there were constant sort of performance boosts with these new M1 systems. So again, I ran the same tests at a scene cut detection, a speed warp cache, a magic mask, and as you can see, the difference between 17.1, which are the gray bars, and 17.3, which are the orange bars, you can see there's little performance bumps. They're not massive, but again, if you can save 30 seconds here, 40 seconds, you know, if you're doing that in a lot of me, I always look at that as going, it's an hour where I can go home earlier. So again, you know, our development team are constantly working, getting Resolve, again, harnessing the power of these M1 systems. And the same went for the H.265 rendering. So we did the same test between 17.1 and 17.3 for the H.265 rendering. Again, the figures that you saw before compared to the Intel machine, they were all 17.3. But with 17.1, again, you can see the bump in performance. And again, what bowled me over was the little Mac Mini. It was nearly twice as quick in Resolve 17.3 as it was in Resolve 17.1. So again, is, you know, those constant updates and us working with Apple as well really do sort of push the performance of Resolve when running on these new systems. So it's the interesting thing, I mentioned it before, the interesting thing is, you know, how these chips work. I said it's a system on a chip. So you've got GPU, CPU, a neural engine processor that can do this new AI processing, unified memory, so it can share the memory where it needs to, all on one chip. So it just suits Resolve in the way Resolve works. These chips to suit Resolve. So again, is the performance of these is very, very good. And it is very interesting because this is the first time any company's done this, to do sort of a system on a chip. But that said, that's not to say we're still not working with other manufacturers to develop their hardware and harness the power for Resolve. Because if you were more based, Nvidia graphics cards, the guys at Nvidia are doing some amazing stuff with their new Ampere technology. So the new RTX graphics cards, fantastic. And quality cards, they're massive. They also have something called tensor core processors on. So the AI processing that the M1 chip can do, the NVIDIA graphics cards have tensor cores on the GPU, and they do neural engine processing as well. So again, if you're not Mac, there are options available to you with new hardware coming out that, again, will really allow you to accelerate the performance of Resolve with the likes of NVIDIA GPUs. But again, ultimately, it depends on what you would like to do. You know, do you want to be mobile? Do you want a laptop? Do you want a desktop machine? And also, you know, it depends on your budget. Now, please forgive me, these prices are in pounds. Sorry, I've just noticed I have a raised hand. Guys, it was saying before, if you've got any questions, if you put them in the Q&A, and I'll sort of come to them at the end. So, yeah, with the, sorry, it said, forgive me, that the prices are in pounds. But, again, it depends on, said, what you want. Do you want a machine to be mobile? Do you want to be able to take your machine with you? Do you want a desktop machine? And again, said it depends on your budget. So I said we have one of these graphics cards in a PC at the office, so an RTX 3090. Absolutely fantastic card. You know, massive GPU, huge tensor core processor on it. It'll do most things in real time. It's really, really impressive. And in the UK, that's £1,400 for that GPU. Now, obviously, you know, you've got to buy all the kit that goes around it. So, you know, if you're working on a budget, you might start looking at an iMac M1, because for the price of one GPU, you can get nearly an entire computer. So again, it depends, you know, people always say, well, what machine should I use? And it's always, well, I have to say, it always boils down to, well, what budget are you working with? Do you want Mac? Do you want PC? Do you want Linux? So, yeah, so what we're saying is we've done a lot of work with Apple, but we are still working with other manufacturers, and said depends what form factor you want and what route you want to go down. You can still harness a lot of Resolve's power without spending too much money. So what does all of that mean? You know, we've talked about file formats and Blackmagic Raw and how that works, and then, but also, you know, we've been talking about these new M1 machines. But what does all of that mean? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you sort of working in Resolve. But just before I do that, if you remember back at the beginning, we talked about the three sort of areas of performance in Resolve. And one of the real strengths of Resolve is you have everything in one system. So, you know, you have your edit, you've got your grade, you've got your visual effects, you've got your audio, and you can deliver all in one system. So you don't have to keep going in and out of other bits of software and conforming that may take time. It's all in one system. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all these bits working together. So what I'm going to do, sorry guys, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop my screen sharing a second. Very simply, because what I need to do is I just need to activate my audio for this. I just need to share my audio. So again, at some point, you guys are going to be able to hear my, sorry, got a little, sorry guys, got a little bit of reverb. You were hearing my M1 machine, the audio from that. So yeah, so what I just need to do is I just needed to share the screen. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire up Resolve. And I'm just going to dive into this project. Okay, so what I need to do, what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to bring in my media. So from my desktop, I have a load of camera files in here. So I'm just going to drop these into the media pool. So again, actually, if I go into here, these, again, they've all been separated into separate bins. So again, I can just drag all of those into the master bin, just change the project frame rate because most of them are shot of 25 frames a second. And there we go. Here are all my clips. Now, for this project, I am using 8K and 12K raw files. I have not created any proxy media. I will, at some point at the end, have to create the media, and I'll sort of show you that and explain why. But ultimately, I am using no proxy files in here. These are all raw files set, and they've been shot in a mixture of 8 and 12K. So again, if I select this file here, you can see in my metadata window, it's a Blackmagic Raw file, and the resolution is 12K. Now again, if I want to very quickly sort out the files between their different resolutions, I can do that with my smart bins. So if I say add a smart bin, and in here what I'm going to do is say with this smart bin, I just want you to be 12K. And in the media pool property types, I can say, I want you to sort this smart bin out by resolution. So again, I can say 12 to 88 by 6480, which is my resolution. So as you can see, I can create a smart bin. So all the smart bin is like a search result. It never moves the clips from the original bins. So you can see this clip's in the Gloucester bin. If I go down here, it's in the smart bin as well. So the clips never move from the original bins, but it's like a search result. So you're kind of going, right, search for these files at a certain resolution, and the smart bin sort of remembers that search result. Now, if I want to create a smart bin for the 8K files, I can do that as well. And the easiest way of doing this is simply duplicating the smart bin and then editing it. And instead of calling it a copy of 12K, I'm going to call it 8K. And then I can say media pool properties resolution is not 12K, and it'll pull in all my 8K files. Also, what I might want to do with this is I can add another parameter. So for example, if I start to add things like timelines, the timelines will be added to the smart bin because it's looking for anything that just isn't 12K. So again, I can add another parameter in here and say clip type is not timelines. So again, basically, when I create timelines, it's not going to add them to this smart bin. So again, as you can see, you can use smart bins for a number of things. Sorting things out by resolution is, yeah, dead easy, dead quick. So now what I'm going to do is I've got all these sort of files in here. Now what I want to do is I want to simply kind of, again, just for the speed of things, I simply want to start searching through these files and pulling down the clips that I need. This project is kind of cool. It's done by it's a promo for a UK carpet company called Lotus. And it's just this video, this promo is just a project that is just celebrating the end of the line of two models. So you've got a green car being driven by a female protagonist and a red car being driven by a male protagonist. So what I want to do at the moment is I want to start to pull down all the shots of my green car and my female protagonist because we start with her. So basically the story is, the full edit with this goes is they kind of both get in their cars at night in separate bits of the city. They meet in a diner and then end up racing at the end. So what I want to do with this is I'm going to start with this Gloucester bin. It was shot around a town in Gloucester in the UK. And really what I want to do with this is I want to be able to view all these clips really quickly. So what I've done is I've come into the cut page. Now, even if you don't use the cut page, you prefer to edit in the edit page, the cut page has some great features in it. One of the things I love is the source tape. So all the source tape will do is it will take the contents of the bin I'm in and just string them all together as one clip. So for me, this is really good. So now what I can do, again, I can even just pick up the playhead and start to drag it. And as you can see, I can start to start to go through and find the bits that I need. So I kind of look at that and go, right, green car. If I just hit X on the keyboard, it'll just mark the clip, and then I can drag and drop this into the timeline. So again, I can start to scroll back. There's my female protagonist again. I'm just going to hit X in here. And again, I've got an append at end I've just got an append, so it'll append this at the end of the timeline. So as you can see, I can quickly go through just throwing clips down just so I can identify which ones I need from this bin. So if you guys, again, if you took advantage of our offer where if you bought a Resolve license, you got the speed editor with it. With the speed editor, you can be even quicker with this. So again, as you can see, I just scroll through. Okay, I've got some shots of the car driving here, and I quite like those. So I'm just going to mark that and say append at end. Just going to take a look at that. I'm just going to say append at end here. That's kind of nice. And I'll just get that shot of the wheel at the end. That looks okay. So I can just throw those down into the timeline. So you see the source tape is really good. I can just sort of simply identify and pull the clips down into my timeline that I need for editing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dive into the edit page. And as you can see, the timeline that I started to build in the cut page obviously translates into the edit page. What I am going to do is I'm just going to build a bin for my timelines. So if I just call this timelines. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and create a new timeline. There we go. I'm just going to create a new timeline. And what I'm going to do is, we're just looking at one viewer there, so I'm just going to reset my UA layout for just a second. Okay, so as I said, very quickly, what I've done is I've gone through and I've pulled down all sort of some of the clips that I want to start editing with, but they're in a timeline at the moment. But that's not a problem. I can just drop the timeline into my source monitor, and then I said I'm using JKNL, the JKNL keys on the keyboard to play this clip back. So, you know, I can just start to mark this shot as my protagonist comes into it. And again, you know, you guys have probably, you know, it's probably seen this before. I can drag and drop a clip into the timeline. I've got this shot here where she walks across the front of it. I kind of like that. So again, I'm using JKNL on the keyboard and I&O to mark the in and out points. And then again, if I drag from the source monitor into the timeline monitor, I can say append to end. So again, you know, I can continue to do this. So again, I can just sort of grab this shot here. I sort of like that. Again, I could use a keyboard shortcut. So if I use F10 on the keyboard, it will do an overwrite. Again, if I don't want anything from this timeline, it's not a problem. I can just go and get the footsteps at the start with my protagonist sort of walking to her car. So, you know, I could just get that shot there. And again, could just use an insert and just insert that at the beginning. So as you can see, really quick, really easy. And again, bearing in mind, these are all 8K and 12K RAW files running on a laptop that cost us £1,600, which is quite impressive. Again, these clips at the moment, they are still in the timeline. You can see they all say timeline 1, but that's not a problem. I can simply say decompose in place, and it will just flatten those clips out quite nicely. And again, I'm not going to go into sort of how you edit in Resolve. A lot of you have probably seen that. If you're new to Resolve, there's training manuals and training videos on our website that will show you how to do this in detail. But, you know, just to show you, again, is I can get a trim tool. I can sort of start to sort of fine tune the timing between these clips. So I can roll with this clip here. I want it to start a little bit earlier. So using my trim tool, I can slip the clip a little bit earlier. And again, you know, all the trimming commands that editors will do are in there. What I am going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit here and I'm just going to import another timeline. So rather than you guys watch me build a timeline, I am just going to import a new timeline. And as you can see, it's a timeline that just has a number of clips edited into it. And, you know, if I were an editor now, I'm kind of going, right, this is sort of my first scene, my intro scene. What I now want to do is maybe just start to tidy it up a little, maybe change the timing of some of the shots, you know, maybe start to add a title to it. So again, you know, if I look at the shots, these shots that are marked in orange, I've got some shots of the car driving, but they're not exactly dramatic. So again, I just want to change the clip speed. So again, I can just go in, change the clip speed. So let's just make these 150. Again, I can do that do it from the inspector as well. I can just dive into the inspector and under speed change, there's the speed. And I can just drag the dial if I want to. So, I just drag the dial up to about 148, that'll do. And there we go. It's a little bit more dramatic. Also, again, I want to do the same with this last shot in here. I just want to speed that up slightly. So again, when the car goes around the corner, it's a little bit more dramatic. What I'm also going to do as well is, again, as an editor, what I might want to do is just, for this timeline, is I want to kind of have some output blanking. So I've got sort of the 21:9 aspect ratio. So under the timeline, I'm simply going to go in and say output blanking 239. And also you can see that the files are still in a log profile. This, because they're raw files from a Blackmagic camera. So very quickly, what I am going to do is I'm just going to go into my color management, and I'm just going to set this to SDRX709 for an output. So if I just quickly dump that in, as you can see now, the files have changed. So when I'm editing, if you're doing client previews, for example, they look more like they should. They don't look too flat. The final thing I want to do with this sort of last shot here is there's sort of a lot of what I would call roadside rubbish. You've got traffic lights and barriers and things. So what I may want to do with this shot, I just want to punch into it slightly. So I'm just going to scale this shot up a little bit. So I'm just going to punch into it. That looks quite nice. And then also what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the smart reframe. So this is a neural engine process. And if I do auto, it'll kind of look at the most dominant thing in the shot, which is the back of the car, and sort of do a reframe. So what it will always try and do is keep the back of the car in shot. It's looking a little bit jittery. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what is happening there. Tell you what, let's try a reference point instead. It's looking, not quite sure why it's doing that. Let's try that instead. Get a bit of analysis. Maybe my speed change is setting that off a little bit. Let's just dial that back and down a touch. So, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, guys. I don't know why that's not playing quite as smoothly as it should. Now it's smoother. Now it's smoother. I think I cranked my speed change up just a little bit too much. However, it's quite impressive when you think about what we're doing here. So we are applying effects and speed changes to 8K raw files, and my little laptop is playing them back real time. Now, one of the ways that Resolve does this, and for me, it's one of Resolve's greatest strengths, is its resolution independence. So at the moment, I am working on a timeline which is 1920 by 1080. If you have 4K files or 8K files, or even worse, 12K files, people automatically assume you have to work with a timeline resolution that matches your camera's resolution. And in Resolve, we don't look at it like that. We say work with a timeline that you can then output. But the great thing is Resolve is timeline resolution independent. So for this project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work at 720p. Now you can see if I change my resolution, my shot in Resolve, all that reframing and that smart reframing that I did, nothing changes. It automatically changes with the resolution of the timeline. So again, just to prove this to you is if I drop this into Ultra HD, you can see nothing changes in Resolve. Again, where people start to get worried is you go, yeah, but you're scaling a shot in. So if you scale a shot in, surely if you are working in a 720p timeline, if I look, there's 720p, surely you are scaling in you're scaling up a 720p image because that's what your timeline's set to. And again, that's not the case. Resolve is still looking at the original files. So when you change the timeline resolution, it'll automatically scale those 8K files or 4K files to your timeline resolution. So you're always looking at the original media. just to prove that to you, if I change this shot, again, remember my timeline is 720p. If I change the scaling from project settings, which is a scale to fit option, and I say crop, this is what you end up getting, is basically what I get here. That is an 8K image working in a 720p timeline. So it just proves that the material is, that you're working in Resolve is actually the original resolution. And again, just to show, the reason why I use a lower timeline resolution, because it just eases the strain on your machine. And just to prove that to you is, as you can see, if I play this back, you can see the playback frame rate in the top left-hand corner is 25 frames a second. Looking good. Yeah, you can see 25 frames a second. If I set this to Ultra HD, at the moment, my laptop can handle that as well. So if I do save in here, if I do that as well, you can see that's running 25 frames a second. If I switch the timeline resolution to 8K, and I play back, watch what happens to my frame rate. All of a sudden, I'm not getting any real-time playback. You can see it's not, you can see there it's saying it's playing it back at 25 frames a second. But again, if I actually say show all video frames, I'll get a more accurate frame rate readout here. So now, when I play this back, you can see that's more the frame rate. I'm running at sort of half speed-ish. So again, what I would say to people is, even if you're going to output at Ultra HD, you can always work at 720p. If you're monitoring, so for example, if you've got a capture and playback device that will allow you to monitor to an external monitor, you can always scale that output to match your monitor. And again, it's scaling the original content. So you're not scaling up to 720p. Sorry, scaling up from 720p to say Ultra HD. The only time Resolve will say, are you sure you want to do this, is if you've got a timeline setting in Resolve that's set to 720p, and then you set the render resolution out to Ultra HD, that's when Resolve is going, well, I'm looking at things at 720p, but what you want me to do is write a new file to Ultra HD. You're writing a new file, so then what you are doing is you are scaling up from 720p to render out at Ultra HD. So all you do is you change your timeline, at the very end, you change your timeline setting to match your output, and then you just render it out. So there are a lot, he said, this is what I love about Resolve, it's got this ability to work in sort of resolution independent to ease the strain on your machine. And you'll see with this, what I'm going to do is I am actually going to say, I'm going to work at 720p for this. So it's one of Resolve's greatest strengths. And that's why, you know, we're doing speed changes in here that, you know, will play back real time on my little laptop. So again, you know, now we sort of understand the resolution we're working at. What I want to do with this project now is maybe I want to do another couple of things. I want to do maybe another speed change in here. So on this clip here, I'm just going to slow it down. So I'm going to say change clip speed, and I'll put this clip speed down to half speed. Again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my trim tool, and I'm just going to slip the content very slightly. So now I play this back. It looks okay, but as you can see, my protagonist is sort of steps through the footage, sort of steps through, because I don't have enough frames. I don't have enough frames to actually play this back smoothly. So again, what I can do is go into my retime and scaling it, and in my retime process, if I say optical flow, I get a smoother slow motion. All the optical flow does is the missing frames, it's sort of making up what these missing frames look like. But this is a really fast and easy, it's a fast way of doing it. Again, with a basic optical flow, you have a bit of a problem. Because it's sort of guessing what these frames look like, oopsie, you can see when my protagonist steps across the pillars, can you see there, my character and my background start to blend together. Just looking at my screen here, as I can see what it looks like on Zoom. You can see it sort of blends together, and that doesn't look great. You know, people can tell you're kind of warping the background. You know, it's like those retouched Instagram shots where everybody makes themselves look skinnier, but they do it by using the warp tool in Photoshop, and you can tell the background warps. And in our video, we don't want that, because you can tell obviously that with the background warping, it's not been shot slow motion. So what we'd really like to do is, I want to get around this by using speed warp. So if I change the setting to speed warp is really good, because instead of just guessing what the frames look like, the speed warp uses DaVinci Resolve's neural engine, its AI, to properly calculate what the missing frames look like. And I get a much better result. But as you can see, the speed warp, once I've added the speed warp, it's very slow to play back. So this is where I want to cache the file. So this is one of the tests we did, because with the speed warp, to get this to play back real time, what I just want to do, just so I can see it properly, I need to cache the file. So under the playback menu, you have a render cache, and as you can see, I've got Smart and User here. A lot of people are tempted to just click on Smart, because Smart's great, but what it'll do is everything in your timeline that needs caching, if you're not quite sure, if you turn on Smart, Resolve will look at every single clip that it thinks that needs caching, and it'll cache it. But again, if you've got a really long timeline, you don't want to be constantly waiting for your machine to cache, or certainly you fighting against it. What you may want to do is you may want to decide what you cache. So in this case, I always say to people was select the user option. So under render cache, select user. And in this case, if I right click, if I say render cache color output, I will just get a red line just above this clip. And as you can see, it'll cache relatively quickly. So when there's a red line above a clip, it needs caching. When you get the blue line, the clip is cached. So now when I play this back real time, that looks great. And as you can see, that warping that we had in the shot no longer exists. The speed warps even that out. So I've got something that looks quite good. It looks like it's been shot slow motion. Speed warp is a fantastic tool. So as you can see now, you know, I'm starting to do. I don't need the audio for this as well. It's all the camera audio. Again, what I might want to do is I might want to add a title. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shuffle these clips down, and as you can see, my cache line moves with the clip. So what I want to do in here is I want to just go into my effects, and under titles, I've got a digital glitch. We use the digital glitch for this project. So again, I'm just going to shuffle the clips down. So again, I just want to start with the title. So there we go. I've got the digital glitch effect in Resolve. And then obviously it'll disappear at the end. With these are fusion compositions. These, when you use the Text Plus or any of the pre-built templates, the machine is generating the graphics, so you'll always have a cache line. But as you can see, it caches really quickly. You can turn that off as well if you want to. Under render cache fusion output, you can turn that to off. But the likelihood is, unless you've got a really powerful machine, it won't play it back real time. But as you can see, this is a template that's been built. So again, you know, I can simply go in and say the project is called the driver, and I'll just do regular font with that, and then also said it's done by Lotus. Let me get it to a point. And as you can see, every time I change this, it needs caching. But again, the caching is very efficient. So again, what I can do with my small text, I'm just going to maybe make that a touch smaller. Again, I'll maybe make that light. So there we go. We've got sort of a nice title in there. But there's elements to this title I want to change. Said, within these parameters in my inspector, there's no way for me to change things like the outline of the text, because what I have to do is fundamentally change the template. Now, in other software, quite often when you're working with templates, what you have to do to change the template, you've got to go into another piece of software to change it and then come back. But what I can do in Resolve, if I just jump into a Fusion page, these titles are made in Fusion. So again, what I can do is if I right click, I can say expand group, and here are all the elements that make up my, these are all the elements that make up my template. So as you can see, I've got a large text in there. So if I select large text, it appears like there's nothing in the inspector, but if I double click, it'll open up the parameter. And under shading, what I can simply do is say, right, I just want to add sort of a red outline to this. So again, I'll up the thickness of this quite a lot. But again, what I'll do is I'll soften the, not the Y, I'll soften the X. So we've got a blur in there. We'll just drop the thickness down a touch. So again, you know, I can do that on the large text. I'll do it on the small text as well. So again, under shading, I can add another element, which is set a red outline. Just make that quite thick. Up the softness a touch. And now when I go back into the edit page, my title has changed. So my digital glitch, as you can see, now has that red outline on it. So that, as you say, that looks, it's that just that efficiency of having everything in one system. So what I'm now going to do is, I'm going to cheat a little bit more, and I'm going to import another timeline. So what I'm going to do with this, I'm just going to import timeline number 2. Sorry. Just undo that a second. What I have to do is that's my fault. I've got the audio files in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop the audio files in first. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import that timeline. There we go. Cool. So again, let's make sure my timeline settings match my project, which is good. Beautiful. Okay, so as you can now see, is all I've done with this project, there's more clips added, and we've added audio. I'm just going to disable disable the Fusion composition, because I just want some smooth playback when I'm editing. Again, what I'm going to do with this, I need to just put my output blanking on here. There we go. I think I'm still color managed. It should be. Yep, that's cool. Okay, so now as you can see, you'll be able to hear is if I just unmute my Mac and play this back, you'll be able to hear the audio that we've added. So there we go. We've just added some audio to this. But as you can hear, the kind of levels are all over the place. So, you know, to begin with, what I want to start doing is I can start doing this in the edit page. And, you know, you can do a lot of your audio in the edit page. So, for example, if I just want to normalize my audio, my music, for example, I can just hit -6. And if I just normalize that, it'll drop the levels down. Same for all my sound effects. I've got all my effects just here. So, again, if I select those, I can do those all at the same time. So if I normalize audio, and I'll do -9, and what I want to do is I want to do these independently. So it normalizes the level per clip, not relative, which is over all of them. So again, I'll just do that. So I've kind of started to work with the levels, but what I really want to do is I really want to start to apply some effects, really work with the audio. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Fairlight page. And the Fairlight page is great because it can show you things that you can't see in the edit page. So for example, let me just narrow these tracks down a little bit so you can actually see them. There we go. So you can see in here, audio tracks 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all my sound effects. Now they're all stereo, apart from these. These aren't stereo tracks. So they're mono tracks in a they're mono clips in a stereo track. So again, what I can simply do is under the clip attributes, I can simply say, we'll make these stereo. And there's so much you can do this in the edit page and in your media pool, but it's great to do it in the Fairlight page because you can actually see the tracks sort of being generated. So again, if I do the same for this one as well. Perfect. So as you can see, I can go and tidy these tracks up. Also, now what I want to do as well is I want all my effects, if you heard before, all the effects just sort of started and stopped. And I don't want them. I want them to fade up and fade down and mix together. So I could to apply, sorry guys, I don't know why. There we go. I don't know why it wasn't deselecting. So again, what I want is I want all these tracks to kind of fade together and have crossfades on them. And I could do that manually, individually per clip. But what I can do now in the Fairlight page, I can select all of the clips. And under the Fairlight menu, I can say batch fade settings. So again, I've got fade in, crossfade, and fade out. And I'll set all these to 10 frames, which is fine. And I've got overwrite existing turned on. So now when I hit apply, you can see it applies a fade and crossfade to things. So now my effects will just fade in and out. They won't just sort of start and stop. The other thing I want to do now is when I'm starting to mix, I will tracks. So all my effects, I want them to be able to control them with a single fader. So again, as you can see in the Fairlight page, you have a much, much more detailed mixer than you do in the edit page. So now what I can do under the Fairlight menu, I'm going to go into bus format. Now you've always got one bus, which is your main output. So I'm just going to call this main. And I'm going to add a couple more buses. And I'm going to call one sound effects. And I'm going to call one reverb. And again with this, I'm going to make all these stereo. So now you can see if I pull my mixer out a little bit further, I've got these three buses in here. There's main, there's sound effects, there's reverb. You can see that all the tracks at the moment are assigned to the main output. But my audio tracks 2 through 5 are all sound effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the main bus assign in here. And now if I add the bus, there we go, I can assign all of these tracks to the sound effects bus, and then the sound effects bus will go out to the main bus. So now what you've got, I've got a fader that controls the level of all my effects. Again, I can play this for you. So as you can hear there, that fader controls all the effects. So again, if you kind of doing a mix and all your effects are slightly too loud, you can assign them to one bus and then just adjust the level of that bus. Again, how audio guys work as well is they don't normally kind of throw effects on clips or on tracks. Because if you have lots and lots of effects on lots and lots of different tracks, Resolve's got to process them all. So one of the smarter ways of doing it is to apply an effect to a bus. So the reverb bus here, I want this to go out to the sound effects bus, so it's controlled by the same fader. And what I'm going to do with this as well, to this track, I'm going to add a reverb. So again, what I'll do is just add a reverb on here. And I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to go for the cathedral one, which is massive, so you guys can actually hear it. So there's a reverb on this bus. So now the reverb sits on this bus. So at any point, if I want a track to have some reverb on it, what I do is I sort of send the signal from that track into the reverb bus, and then it goes into the sound effects bus that goes into the main bus. So let me show you what I mean by that. So my footsteps, track number 3 is a series of footsteps. And as you can see, if you see in the little viewer when I play this back, we go from having a close-up of the feet to a massive area. So I want a load of reverb to come in there. So what I can do is on audio track 3, so on A3, audio 3, under bus sends, I can say, I want you to send a signal from track 3 to the reverb bus. Now if I turn on my automation, under track number 3, can you see here, I've got an option that says none, and I can choose, well, sends, reverb, send level. So I now have an automation line for this. So now what I can do is, again, I'll do this really, really quickly, is I've got a pen tool. So what I can do is, again, if you've got a fader, you can do this with the faders. But again, what I can do is just draw in how much reverb is being sent. So now when I play this back, again, we can sort of solo the footsteps. Maybe I'll just bump this level up a little bit. Now when I play this back, you'll hear the reverb come in. So as again, you come in there, and also as well, you can actually see, again, I've just turned the audio off, but you can see the level that's being sent to the bus. So again, this is how audio guys work, and it's a much more efficient way of working. And again, this goes into the, the idea that you've got everything in one system, because now, when I go back to the edit page, all that audio mixing is in there, all the tracks are done, and it's ready to go. Done the audio, what I can actually now start to do is say, well, I want to sort of finish by putting some effects on these shots. I want to look at maybe doing a split screen, maybe keyframing some effects. So if we take a look here, I've got 3 shots stacked on top of each other, and I want to do a split screen. And for me, one of the quickest ways of doing a split screen now is to add a solid color generator, make it a new compound clip, because you can't add effects to compound clips. And then in my filters, I've got something called video collage. So if I apply the video collage effect to my compound clip, it'll split the screen and show me the layers underneath. So now what I can do is, if I go into my effects, you can now see I would like I want three columns and 1 row. So there we go. I want to do a split screen like that, and I want to bring the rounding down to 0. So now what I'd like to do is I would like to just sort of start to go in and sort of just reframe these shots really quickly. So again, I've got a transform tool, I've got a crop tool. The middle shot looks okay, actually. I just need to crop that back. And again, in the transform option, I can transform that like so. And there we go. We've got a nice split screen effect. So if you think there, we've done a split screen, and that's 3 layers of 8K raw files playing back real time, which is quite impressive. So what I might want to do is I might want to also, you might want to start to do more complex things like keyframe effects. So again, if I take a look at this clip here with the car that we were working on before, the car sort of speeding around the corner, what I want that effect where you get sort of the light streaks off the back of the car. So again, what I'm going to do is I am just going to apply, we've got the light rays effect. Just going to apply that to the clip. One of the things with this clip is it pulls in light sources. So again, if I say source regions, I can tweak these because I don't want it to bring in too much of the license plate. There we go. That looks okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the playhead right to the end of the shot. And again, what I can now do in here is I can adjust the position of the light rays for where I want them to be. And again, is I can up the brightness, I can up the length, and I'm just going to change the color as well. So that looks fine for the start of my shot, but as you can see, what I've done in here is I changed the position, the length, and the brightness. So again, if I just keyframe these, so I've got said position, length, brightness. pull the playhead back to the start, you can see that, again, the light rays now are not in the right place. They're a bit too bright. So again, all I've got to do is adjust the positioning, adjust the length, adjust the brightness, and now when I play this back, it'll look a bit more natural. So again, that's really cool. You know, I'm keyframing a quite intensive filter on an 8K RAW file on my £1,600 laptop. So now once we've got to that, now what we want to do is, you know, you want to sort of get into grading. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to jump across into the color page and we can start grading. Now, again, with this, guys, I'm not going to kind of go through in depth how you grade in Resolve. A lot of you have probably seen some of that stuff already. Again, there's a book online and videos that take you through the color page. But what I'll do is I'll just show you what we did with some of these grades. So what I'm going to do is just going to import a series of stills. So just bear with me a second. I'll clear 11, 13, and I'll just bring in the mask just in case. Okay. So what we had to do with this shot, first of all, what I want to do with this is I'm just going to change my color management very slightly. I'm going to change my color management to DaVinci Wide Gamut. So I've got a little bit of a wider profile to work with when I'm working in Resolve. So, you know, we've got this shot here. And again, this is the hero shot. It's one of the opening shots of the car that's said it's come to, you know, this model of car has been around for like 30 years and they're finally killing it off. So Lotus were like, these are our hero shots. It's got to look perfect. And again, they wanted sort of a cyan type look. So the thing that you always have to do with cars, you never ever want to affect the color of the car. So, you know, one of the first things we did, we just power windowed the car. So we can work with the outside of the shot, but make sure the color of the car still looked as it did in real life. So again, I'll just take you through what we did on this grade. So if I just apply the grade, this is what it ended up looking like. So the first thing, I'll just turn it off for a second. The first thing we applied was a noise reduction. The shot was, because it was low light, it was such noisy, but we did a noise reduction. And then there was a balance. It looked a little bit yellow and a little bit dark, so we just lifted it slightly and just got rid of that yellow color cast on there. We then looked at the set. Then what we did was we masked the car off and worked outside the mask, because again, the clients were saying is, well, we want the scenes with the green car to look sort of greeny, but not the same color as the car. And then with the red car that we had, they wanted those to look, the grade to look red. So that's what we did. So first of all, we did a power window around the car and then graded outside of it. So we gave it that kind of cyan green look. And then working inside, so we'd applied that look, but then again, the clients were like, the car still looks a little bit flat. It doesn't quite pop, but don't affect the color too much. So all we did is we lifted the saturation of the shot and just adjusted the contrast, so the car really stood out. The other problem they then had was there's a reflection. From the yellow lines, there's a reflection at the back of the car. So ultimately what we did, oopsie, sorry, that's my fault. Hit the wrong shortcut. So again, what we did was with this is we just did a power window and kind of did a power window to just mask off the back end of the car. Again, they were then saying, yeah, okay, so the wheels need to look a bit more contrasty, so that's what we did, which put a little bit more contrast. And then there were some light sources as well. There's two spotlights over the car, so we just sort of accentuated those a little bit. Again, the softening on that could probably be just looking on zoom, the softening on that, it looks a little bit too pronounced. A little bit too pronounced, so we're just going to jack that up a little bit. And then there was a final node of a look in there. So again, once we've done everything just needed maybe just dropping down a stop and a little bit of sharpening on there. And that's how we did the grade. So as you say, we've got sort of 10 grade nodes of grading, including noise reduction. But impressively on my machine, I play this back and it's real-time playback, which is amazing. So there we go, got real-time playback on that shot. And, you know, I could show you other grades. You know, on this shot here, we wanted this to match sort of the look outside the car, because my protagonist, even though it was shot at a totally different time of day, and so basically what we did is, again, it was very blue. So again, we sort of cooled it off a lot. The light source, as you can see, was too orangey, so we made it greeny. And then also we put a power window around the protagonist's face, and then tracked it with a layer node, just so we had more control over a skin tone. So, you know, very kind of simple grade. We then also, there was a shot with the magic mask as well. So saying, again, this was an AI process. So what we had in here is we had this shot, and again, the client was saying, well, really what we want to do is we want to sort of lift her face a little bit. So the easiest thing to do is sort of try it with a magic mask. So again, with the magic mask, I could sort of zoom in. And in this, I'm going into features, and I'm just choosing face. I'll get a reasonably large. So again, so what the magic mask will do is you can tell it to mask a whole person, or try and get it to identify a face. So now once I'm on the face, what I could do is say, right, just do a quick track for me, and track. Now, as you can see, this is quite slow. Again, if you had a more powerful machine, this process would be quicker. But the little the little MacBook does a reasonable job. You can see with this, the mask isn't, you know, it isn't perfect. But if I did better quality and I crank up the Smart Refine quite a lot, it sort of sticks to the face a little bit more. And then also a little bit of cheating. I'd put like a 50% blur radius on there. And as you can see, it'll give me a reasonable mask. And then what I could do is, rather than lifting the face, I could simply say, add an outside node to work outside my mask. And then again, just maybe drop that down a touch. So that, as you can see, so now again with this shot, using something like the magic mask, I can play this back, and as you can now see, I'm starting to struggle a little bit with processing. That looks pretty good for, you know, for a quick grade, but as you can now see, again, if you had a really more powerful machine, it'd be able to just fly through this in real time. But unfortunately, with my machine, it doesn't. Again, to get around that, what you could do is do things like node caching, turn your node caching on, and it just caches that magic mask, and then you'll get real-time playback. So, said is, you know, I could spend a whole day with you guys going through grading. That would be good to do at some point. But then the final thing, one of the final things we had for this project was, this is the hero shot. And then the guys were saying, okay, so where the car's been parked, there's been birds sitting above. And they were kind of going, we can't have that sitting next to our hero shot. It's got to be cleaned up. Okay, so I'll just turn the grade off for a second. So they were saying is, this has got to be cleaned up. Now I could try and sort of cheat it in the color page, but really what I need to do is I need to create a clean plate for it in Fusion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump across into Fusion. Now, this is where your workflow with sort of lower end machines, it has to get a little bit more advanced. Your workflow has to kind of change slightly. Fusion is one of the first things that is processed in Resolve. It's the first page that is processed in Resolve. So as you can see in here, Fusion is looking at an 8K file. Even if I create proxy media, it still wants to look at the 8K file, because it's saying is, you want to create a clean plate for your file. Now, I'm going to make it a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do with this, because it's a raw file, I'm going to decode the file at 4K res, because I'm going to output Ultra HD. So I'm only going to decode 4K. There is a reason for this. Again, nothing changes in my grade. My mask doesn't change. You know, my power window, for example, as you can see, that doesn't change just because I've changed the decode quality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and work on this in Fusion. But as you say, Fusion is what I was saying is even the decode quality, Fusion is still saying I'm still looking at the 8K file. So my little laptop cannot cope with me doing things like matte painting at 8K res. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find this file in the media pool. I'm just going to call it VFX. I'll just call it VFX. So I've just created a bin that I'll just call VFX, and there's that single clip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it out of my project. Now what I did earlier is I created a ProRes proxy file at 4K. So using Resolve's Media Manager, I went in and created a proxy file at 4K resolution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab that proxy file, drop it back into Resolve. Now again, because the file name and the timecode match, you can see Resolve will ignore the file extension and reconnect the file. So now when I go into Fusion, you can see I'm working 4K, not 8K. So now this will help me build my little, it'll help me clean up this shot. Now the first thing I need to do on this shot, if I just play this back, there's a little bit of camera wobble on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a planar tracker. So with a planar tracker, I'm just going to sort of track the area that we're getting rid of. And if I set a start frame and just do a quick planar track, it'll just make sure that the clean plate that we create, the composition, has the same camera movement on it. So again, if I create a planar transform, the planar transform has my tracking information, so I can get rid of the planar tracker. Now what I want to do is I'm going to create something called a time stretcher. So I've got a time stretcher. Now what a time stretcher will do, it'll allow me to simply create a still frame. So as you can see, if I load that into viewer number 1, you can see it doesn't move, which is cool. It's exactly what I want, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into the time stretcher. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a paint tool. And with the paint tool, I am going to make it a clone tool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint out. I'll tell you what, make my brush a little bit bigger. It's a bit small. Again, if I hold down the Option key, I can choose an area to clone. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint out all the rubbish that's on the floor. So again, guys, I'll do this really quickly. You don't have to... So there we go. Again, I'm just doing this really quickly. But there we go. You can sort of get the idea that now, as you can see, I've cleaned this area up. But now what I want to do is we want to limit the painting just to that one area, because at the moment it's that this paint node is on the whole frame. So if I just get something like a matte control, I can add a matte control, and in the matte control I can then add a polygon to this. So again, basically what I can do is I can just mask out the area I'm working on. And so the reason I use matte controls is I like them because you can have different inputs to them. So I've got a garbage matte in here. So under the matte control, I can now see we've masked out this area. Again, oopsie. It's zoom that in. You can see we've masked out that area. Again, I need to invert the selection. So I invert. So there we go. There's our clean area here.
You can just soften the edge slightly as well. So there we go. We've got the clean plate. The clean plate is on there now. And now, as I said, is all I need to do with this clean plate, I need that area to follow my original video. So this is where we'll connect the planar transform from earlier. And then all I need to do is get a merge node and connect it to the merge node. So I'm connecting the clean plate of the background to the foreground. And there we go. Again, if I play that back, you can now see that area is now clean. But the problem is, I'm still looking at that low-res proxy file. That's what I love about Resolve. If I delete that, if I delete the proxy file from the media pool, and I go and get the original file, drop it back in, because Resolve knows what the file said, it'll auto reconnect using the clip name and the time code. So it's reconnected to the raw file. It has reconnected the raw file to the Fusion composition. And also, if I go and turn on my grade, give it a minute. If I go and turn on my grade, he says, there we go. Oopsie. Come on. We're going to turn on my grade. It turns the grade on as well. So as you can see, you can now see my machine though is starting to struggle. What I'd have to do now is, you know, the caching in the edit page. I'd have to turn the Fusion cache output on and just wait for it to cache. And it might take about 10 minutes to do it. But you can see if you hit a slight problem with, you know, when you're doing intensive things like that, you can unconnect files, reconnect files. But again, you're doing it all in one system. So even though I'm working on a proxy file, I can throw it away, reconnect the raw file, reapply the grade, and it's just done. And you now start to see the strength of everything being in one system. So hopefully that shows you just, you know, everything working together in Resolve. So we've done some editing, we've done some grading, we've done some visual effects, we've done some audio, and we've all done it using 8 and 12K raw files on a laptop that cost me kind of $1,800. And to me, that's amazing. So, you know, when you look at that, you can see where post-production is going. And we are leaning more and more towards the AI side of things. Said Resolve has a neural engine in, and our neural engine does a number of things. It's the thing that does the speed warp. It's the thing that does the magic mask. It'll do things like color matching, the smart reframe that I did. We have facial recognition, so it'll identify people in shots, and you can tag people in shots. It's, you know, this is where the post-production industry is going. You can see this with the hardware because the Mac M1 machines and then the Nvidia GPUs have these neural engine processors that speed up the process. And all I can say is Resolve, we are doing more work around neural engine stuff to make some of these processors much, much faster. So coming back kind of full circle right to the end of going, you know, where does Resolve strength sit? It is in those three areas, you know, its ability to read different formats, its ability to harness the power of its hardware. It is everything in one system. And then it's these sort of things that feed into that. So, you know, we've developed Blackmagic Raw. So you've got a raw format that works really, really well in post. Said Resolve is resolution independent. So you can change resolution to ease the strain on your machine. We're the only company that does a lens to delivery workflow, so the color that you get on set is replicated on output. We do, as you say, we always harness GPU processing. We've got the new M1 systems and the Nvidia systems that have these performance boosts in them. And added into that, we've got this neural engine processing. So hopefully today, that's not just sort of, you know, what we talk about, it does actually work. We've developed a codec that works, we've developed a file that works for post. But Resolve really does harness the power of its hardware. And with these new systems, you don't need to spend huge amounts of money to really get creative with Resolve. These M1 machines have blown me away, just how good the performance is on them. Said, I've got a little Mac Mini at home, and it will kick out of my Intel MacBook Pro quite easily. So yeah, all that's left for me to say is, thank you for listening today. Thanks for sticking with me. Fazia, hello. Are you there? Ooh, he may be, maybe not. Okay. You guys you guys may have had some questions. So what I'll do is I will just jump into the chat. So Mayoa, I'm sorry about my pronunciation. Newer Intel chips might handle them better, and AMD chips too. So you're absolutely right. All technology is sort of moving forward. So there's new Intel chips that are coming out that will handle these processors better. AMD as well. Obviously, we work closely with Nvidia, but we also work with AMD as well. And the guys at AMD also have neural engine processors on their GPUs. And so our development team working with Resolve, we work with a lot of manufacturers. We work with Apple, we work with Intel, we work with Nvidia, we work with AMD, and there's lots of development in a lot of different areas. I mean, obviously, I think, the exciting thing for our development team was working with the Apple guys around the development of M1 hardware, because it's no coincidence, if you've ever watched any of the Apple promotions, Resolve features heavily in their M1 promotion stuff. Someone's asked, is DaVinci software on its own heavy for the system? No, the DaVinci software itself isn't. It all depends on what you're doing with it. So Resolve will use certain programs. So the software itself is like a couple of gig, The databases where your projects are saved, they're kind of very low on your system as well. It's just, sending data. It all depends. It all depends on what you're doing on your system. So for example, Resolve will use CPU processing for certain things. So for example, if you've got an older graphics card or an older system, using H.264 files and H.265 files for decode and encode, so using them in Resolve and then rendering out the other side, it will use your CPU quite heavily. When you're working in Resolve, it will use the GPU quite a lot. So your grading, your noise reduction, your Resolve effects, they are all done by the the GPU. So again, it will lean on the GPU when you're working in Resolve. And then things like RAM becomes important if you use things like Fusion a lot, because what Fusion does for playback, rather than you waiting for a file to cache and it write the file to a hard drive, what Fusion does, like a lot of motion graphics packages, it caches things in the RAM. So it does lean on your system depending on what you are doing. But, if you're doing kind of just sort of editing with it, you can have other applications open without a problem. When you start to get into more intensive processors like noise reduction in grading or Fusion, matte painting, you may find that closing other applications on your system will help boost the performance of Resolve. But it's not too intensive. Ivan said, I use a MacBook 8 gig RAM, 2.4 gigahertz. Is that enough? Ivan, it will be. It will be. It will be enough depending on what you're doing. It said, set your timeline resolution down to a low res. For things like editing, it will be absolutely fine. When it comes to grading, what you may find if you start to get over 5, 6, 7 nodes of grading, what you may find is your machine starts to drop frames, so you won't have real-time playback. And then what you might have to do is cache the files. So Resolve will work The very minimum specs we recommend for Resolve is an i7. Ideally, you can use an i5, but ideally an i7 processor. Said minimum 8 gig of RAM and a graphics card with a minimum 2 gigabytes of VRAM on. Ideally 4. Again, if your machine isn't capable of running Resolve, when you install it, it will tell you. So unfortunately, if you've got a really old graphics card with like a gig of memory on, it's just not powerful enough to run Resolve. Tamanor has asked, is it possible to get the recorded version of this session? So yes, so through the guys at Highway who are hosting us today, they will have a recording available to you. So when this session finishes, once it's processed in Zoom and stuff, this recording will be available to you and you can go and watch this again. So, is the user interface easy to understand? It looks very complicated from your presentation. It can look intimidating to start with. It absolutely can look intimidating to start with. However, as I said, if you guys are interested, unfortunately, we've actually finished. We were doing a session this week. We've been doing some online training sessions. So again, if you're looking at getting to Resolve, if you go onto our website and click in the DaVinci Resolve section, there's a tab called Training. And in that Training tab, there is a section that includes a manual, which is several manuals, but one of the first manuals is an introduction to DaVinci Resolve. So it's an introduction to the edit page. It'll take you through a little bit of color, a little bit of fusion, a little bit of Fairlight. It'll just introduce you to those pages, but it will take you through the interface. So if you're new to that, there's also some videos on there as well. So yes, it does look intimidating to begin with, but once you understand what each page does and what you're looking at, it becomes easier to get to grips with. Weirdly, one of the things that Resolve is for, but I quite like, it doesn't have floating windows, so you don't have a page full of windows. The interface is very neat and tidy, which means, you know, when you are sort of learning the software and getting to grips with it, all the buttons are, hidden windows are available by the click of a button, but your interface doesn't change massively, so it's very easy to kind of get to understand it fairly quickly. I'll tell you what I would say is, because I'm sharing a screen, let me just show you guys where those resources are. So on our Blackmagic website, there we go. I'll show you guys this on our website under products. If you go into products, great, my internet's now running slowly. Going to DaVinci Resolve, you can click on either DaVinci Resolve or DaVinci Resolve Studio. And can you see under here, I've got something called Training. And under Training, if I scroll down here, you can see there's a load of videos. So there's a load of videos if you want to watch them. So if you were saying is the interface easy to learn, there's an introduction to editing that'll take you through the interface. So there's a video you can use, and there's also a project file you can download. If you want to kind of not just want a video, you actually want some written content. If you scroll down here, you can see we've got these training books as well. So you can download the PDF, and it's a full training book. And also you can download the lesson files as well. So if you don't want to learn via video because you're kind of constantly looking at two screens, you can download the book and all the lesson files and go through at your own pace. Again, guys, keep an eye out, because I think what we may do in summer as well, we may do another section for this beginner's guide to Resolve. So it'll be free 4-day online training. And again, depending what language you speak, we'll be doing one in summer in English, but there is one coming up in French in the next couple of weeks, I think. So if you've got the time, and you are French speaking, obviously, you can sort of get hands on, and that's a trainer led, and there'll be proctors in the session as well. Excellent. Good. Well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Ivan, does Blackmagic give certificates for video editors and colorists? It does. So if you do our certified training courses, again, even if you learn at your own speed, you can take an online exam. So you can take an online exam in each of the disciplines. So you can see, I always say to people is you've got to start with a beginner's guide, but then you can see there's an editor's guide, Fairlight, colorist, visual effects guide for all of them. So what you can do, yeah, if you wanted an editor one and a color one, you could sort of go first intro guide, but then you could go through the editor's guide and the colorist guide, and you can take exams in each one, and then you will be a DaVinci Resolve certified end user in the disciplines. Then in the future, if you were interested in potentially becoming a trainer for this, you could apply to become a certified trainer through our certified trainer program. And then you will get a certified trainer certificate. And then if you do all of them, you can be a master end user. But then also if you do all the train the trainer courses as well, you can become a master trainer in Resolve as well. So yeah, the certificates are there. So there's little bits of information. Said if you take a look at this page, there's a lot of information in here about how you can become. I think it's a little bit down towards the bottom. How you become a Blackmagic Design certified trainer, and also if you guys are running your own businesses and you want to become a certified training partner, so you do official training for us, you can do that as well. All the information is in the webpage. Excellent.
Thank you,
excellent.
Simon.
Cool. Okay.
Simon.
So I think that's it for questions. Again, if you guys have any more questions, what I will do is I'll just pop our pre-sales email address in here. So the good thing is I now have a team. It's not just me anymore. So we've got a team of guys now. Oh, sorry, I'll get the spelling right. There we go. So there we go. That's the pre-sales email address. So again, if you've got any more questions about Resolve, feel free to email us on that email address, and we will get back to you. Yeah, all that's left for me to say is, Fazia, I don't know if you're there. Hello. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching today. A big thank you to Highway as well for having us. Said the guy will make the recording available to you. And yeah, that's all left for me to say is, said thank you very much for coming. Hopefully in the future, I might be able to leave the country so we can do more of this stuff in person, which would be great. But yeah, thank you very much, guys. Look after yourselves, and hopefully we shall see you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.